Hey, Rob.
Hey, how's it
We
going?
just got off an interview call. Doing good.
Okay. Are you furloughed or are you still working?
No, Dewey's fine. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. We have a couple Department of Commerce people. Do you know NIST, Standards and Technology?
Uh-huh.
We have a couple NIST people who are like embedded at DOE and they're furloughed, so they're not working. But
Oh, that has to be like really frustrating, disconcerting when like half your team is from somewhere else and they get shut
yeah,
down.
it's weird. Not
Uh,
good. How's the bike riding been going? You still doing the morning rides?
I haven't for the past week for various reasons, but in the large, yes.
Mhm. That's cool.
Yeah.
There's a park not too far from my house called Druid Hill Park,
Uh-huh.
which is
Like
like this. What's that?
Druid?
Druid, yeah. There's a statue of William Wallace. I have no idea why. I've done some
Wow.
Googling on this. I don't know what the story is, but it's like the Central Park of Baltimore, kind of. But now it's surrounded by neighborhoods that haven't really bounced back from the '80s yet. And so historically, it was a contender with Central Park. It was architected by the same guy,
Hmm.
and now it's just like abandoned. But these old bones are there. It's really beautiful.
Oh, wow.
I've been trying to get out there for running more.
Nice.
Yeah. Gretchen's going to get a laptop charger, she said, so it'll be a minute or two till we want to go. And were we expecting a new contributor on this call from Slack?
Unclear. It sounded like he said he was going to show up to the call.
Yeah,
I also have a friend who I was talking to on Friday who said she might try and make it, but
that's good.
I have no idea like whether she actually is or not.
My friend Sarah, who dropped in for 2 or 3 calls maybe half a year ago, has been at Facebook this whole time, and I think starting up at Facebook burned out her volunteer time. But maybe I'll
Hmm.
chase her down again.
Yeah.
You used to work there, right? I think
No, I've never been to Facebook.
it's Apple, maybe. I think.
Yeah.
Baby lunchtime is going to happen behind my laptop here, so excuse the adorable sounds.
If we see a splatter of green pea mash go flying behind you, we'll know.
That is a real risk today. Or puffs. Do you guys do like the little Cheerios products? Yeah, puffs everywhere. Puffs in my socks. Just all the puffs.
They dissolve so easily, though. so quickly.
It looks like our loader has a gateway error.
Oh, that's interesting. I did not get it just moments ago, but let me check again. No. Let's see here. Okay. Oh, yep. Thank you, Dan, for dropping that direct link. Okay, so now that Gretchen's here, let's go ahead and get fired up. Gretchen, can you go ahead and start with your updates? Are you ready?
Is she
Yeah.
here? Oh, I didn't see her. What's wrong?
Okay, so done. I've talked with a few analysts and thought about the, what would be most helpful with dealing with redirects. And the consensus is like still doing, as we're already doing the like showing the end result comparison of what a user, who's trying to go to that URL would eventually see. So, the redirect, the content of the page they're directed to, but also having some indicator either in this scanner output sheet or in the, actually, I guess most important, especially when we move away from like Google Sheets, to have some notification in the scanner UI that it is a redirected page, just because then that would allow us to kind of try to backtrack to when it started redirecting and why, what other pages are being redirected here, that kind of thing. So that would be the ideals for that. The other thing I've been thinking about and talking with people about are the priority algorithm, and mostly like it's very helpful. Like the proportion of changes that are just HTML are actually like really high, and so just being able to see like, oh, that's less than 0.1. I'm like, now I'm going to look at that. Has been super useful. We have had a few like significant changes that are in the 0.16 kind of area, because like a single link removal is actually significant. And so I just don't think there's really a way to get around that, to make like a more concrete lower threshold, because that individual word swaps can be important and the single link can be important. But one thing I was wondering if it's possible, and I'm assuming it is because of the way the algorithm is built, to also have maybe a new column in the output sheet that indicates like, is this a text change, link change, or solely HTML change? Like that we can kind of assume from the very low priority value, but because it's the priority value is additive with any links in any text, it would be really useful to, if it's easy, automation just to indicate if there's a link or a text change or both, would be useful.
Rob, I'm trying to call back to the conversation we had about this of like different bars with different kinds of change. Remember that? Like in the UI, we can add,
yeah. Yes, we definitely talked about that in the UI. And
we decided we couldn't add that many columns to the sheet, I think. So we went with this, you might say, compressed single number representation.
Yeah, but I think that conversation was in the context of we were concerned with trying to highlight more about the composition of the priority number. Because if the ask is like, really, we just want to know like the type of change, that's a thing we could easily do. That doesn't require some more complex way to talk about it. That needs something more visual like the UI. Although like there's also a good point that we should that's an easy thing to surface both in the UI and in the sheets, because was there a link change? We can say it was a link change. Was there a text, like we can just say those three things because we only have three things that we look at right now. The question about putting them in the sheets, it's easy to do. It has the same implications of every time we add something to the sheets, which is, do you want to replace a column? No problem. Do you want to add a column? Keep in mind that when we do that, you have to change everybody's sheet so that when they paste it in, like they have to add space. But from our side of just like adding another column to the set is not too big a deal. So that's very doable, and you're right with the way the algorithm is structured. We can really easily just, like, if it's a comma separated list of all the things that changed, if we say like source code changed, text changed, link changed, or like source comma link comma text or something, very doable. The other thing I want to say is it would be super helpful to us to have examples of lowly prioritized pages that should have been higher. Like that's the thing that we really need in order to make the prioritization algorithm better, because we know that it's overly done right now. And we can imagine ways to make it better, but the best way to make it better is see examples of where it's failing.
Yeah.
Rather than like try and gin up ones in my imagination or Dan's imagination or Jason's imagination.
I can definitely compile some. The kinds of things that, like, I just had a point, I don't know if it was 10 or 16, and I have a visual memory, so it's challenging to think.
It was small.
Yeah. But things like, a link on a sidebar to the National Compliance Initiative was removed, which, is, and I think in part because it was so prominently displayed, it significantly decreases access to that. So maybe like in some ways, like highlighting like sidebar or other like highly, like very prominent positions, if that's easy. I don't know if that's easy to do in the code, if identifying where those are in the code.
I think another thing that might identify the removal of a link like that is it cuts off a large amount of other stuff. Like that link goes to many other links. And if we also track those links, that might be knowable to us. It's not really where it is on the page that makes it important. It's that it's cutting off a whole section of the site. Is that right? So I don't know, it's just a thought.
Yeah, that's a good, I don't think we have any great tools for looking at that at like the map level, even though we have the ongoing, not quite really their initiative of mapping sites regularly.
Yeah.
But I think we have a longstanding issue about adding some heuristics to identify and split out, not just in links, but in also in other diffs, what content is main body versus like things like headers and sidebars. And on some level, that's very doable, but it's always going to be somewhat fuzzy logic. It's just a matter of like somebody taking the time to start to work on that. And we haven't, because it hasn't traditionally been the highest priority thing. So it's just been sort of sitting there for a long time. So it's a long-winded way of saying we can sort of do it. It's not low effort.
Right. There's a chain of prerequisites to being able to do that. And it's all stuff that we want to do, but yeah.
And I think it's still not like, super high priority. Like right now with the government shutdown has made like a flood of changes that are very annoying. But other than that, the just number of changes we're seeing every week is low enough that I don't think it's like a huge, I don't think it's like super high priority to be able to like parse that out more precisely right now.
Is the flood of changes what we should have been able to predict, which is like lots of just little indicators added to every page that are like, hey, this page might not be updated because the government shut down?
Yeah, exactly. What is interesting about that is that because different pages are different lengths, that exact same banner will have different priority values for every. I spot checked something like 50 different changes over like several domains, and every single one was a notice. And but like on a super short page, that change was like, I don't know, it was like 0.34. And then on other pages, it was like 0.01 or 0.10. So, um, so it was, oh, I suppose I could have actually just looked at the text diff length though. That would have been a smarter way of doing that.
Yeah, that would probably be the ideal way to identify those things.
Yeah.
I guess like the reason I ask is because we saw that same effect when lots of sites added, like we threw away a bunch of things from 2016 banners, and it seems like this sort of pattern. Well, it seems like the sort of thing that's being established as a pattern is like when some event happens that affects operations. Lots of government sites are now starting to add little banners or whatever. And so that seems like a sort of thing that we should at least file for ourselves a task of like trying to think about ways we could identify stuff like that, so that in the best case, we can just always sort of identify that kind of thing and flag it as however appropriate or not it is to care about. And in the worst case, it gives us the tools to, when we suspect something like that might be upcoming, like an administration change, or like we know a shutdown just happened, so like next week this is going to start showing up on sites, we can set it up for the type of banner we expect to see. So that way, in the future, because it's too late now, we've already seen all the changes probably for this banner. But in the future, when we know that's coming, we can try and make it not be a flood of changes that are sent.
If it is shut down for years, we might be ready by the time they remove the banners, and we have to analyze all those. And at that point, I'll have a lot of time to work on edgy stuff.
Oh, geez.
I'm sorry for the furlough, Dan. That's gotta suck.
I'm scot-free right now. We'll see how long it takes. Yeah.
The other thing I've been working on is like streamlining our domains. It's been something that's, a conversation that's been put off for months now. But I haven't successfully figured out how to non-horrifically figure out exactly the URLs that are in all of them. I know there's like maybe a master list somewhere in Versionista, but anyway, I haven't done that yet. But I'm wondering if it like would be possible to like consolidate, like all of the DOI domains into kind of like a single sheet, and consolidate like EPA into like epa.gov/ like anything that starts with A, B, C, or D in one sheet. And kind of like my goal is to think, with each kind of domain clump to be in the like 1,000 to 1,500 pages like size, just for like the size of our monitoring team. And instead of having like the analysts have to open up like 6 different sheets that they're monitoring, just have like one analyst on all of, of DOI, and one analyst on, all of DOE.gov/EERE, and one analyst on all the other DOEs, or something like that. But with EPA, we've got like almost, well, these numbers are off because these numbers don't include the deduplication, but there's like nearly 6,000 EPA URLs, and so that's too big for anyone. So thinking about like the best way to split that up, I was thinking like all the way through, like alphabetically through climate change, or something. And then, yeah. Oh, that's
Yeah.
the list.
We can, yeah, so I just posted a list of all the URLs. It may have changed by a handful since I generated that list. Like, I want to say I generated that about a month ago. But it's really easy to make a new list. And if what you need is a list of all the domains, I can also do that.
I've got all the domains. I think.
Okay.
The current, what we call domains.
Well, so I mean actual domains.
Oh, okay.
Or I mean, we can do whatever you want, basically.
Well, I want
We've
nothing
got
to
the
do with our
sorts of
current
systems
domains.
anyway. So it also a good point. Like, if you want nothing to do with our current domains, should we throw them away? Should we replace them with something else? Should we replace them with the sort of categorization you're talking about? I think it's relatively easy for us to take the current list of URLs we're tracking and recategorize them in any way, because now we have our nice tagging system, so we can just set up, whatever kind of tags we want and apply them via a set of rules. The harder part is figuring out a good way to do that continuously whenever we add a new URL. Because the way like we automatically do it right now is we generate a tag based on the domain and some other info that comes out of Versionista. So we generate the maintainer based on the way the site is named in Versionista. So it's named to include like the agency that maintains it in a predictable way, so that we can yank that out and say like this is the maintainer. And then the site tag is just the name of the site from Versionista. So when a new page gets added in Versionista, it automatically gets tagged by site correctly. And if we stop using those tags, then we'll have to find a new way to make sure that when a new URL gets added, it gets the appropriate tag. But that's the only part that's hard. Like, otherwise we have the tagging mechanism, we have all the tools we need to say any arbitrary set of rules you want to apply to this set of pages for how you want to tag them, and then we can sort the sheets or whatever we want to sort by those tags. Then we can do that.
Stopping short of going down into the weeds, Gretchen, what about a system like this? Like, it sounds like we want to block them by like domain, unless the domain's too big, and then we want to block it by some sub thing and that, and unless that gets too big, some sub thing and that. So you could have some job that once a week goes through and says, here's the like most specific that we had to get with this page, and let's look at everything that's in that group. Is that group larger than 300 pages? If so, start getting more specific and break it down and break it down. It seems like a tractable project. Not utterly trivial, but does that sound reasonable to you, Rob? Like, look at the set of tags, look at how big the groups on each tag are. If necessary, set off an alarm that we need to get more specific, or maybe automatically get more specific and apply more specific tags.
Yeah. I mean, that sounds more reasonable to do as like a single task, like just make all those tags or just run the numbers and then.
But they're going to grow over time, right?
Yeah, I mean they are. Yeah. So I guess like where I see it as hard or concerning is managing like the set of these rules or values that are specific to us versus like what we want to encode in the software, because we're trying to do like an open source redistributable thing that other people could run.
Basically, the business logic has to go somewhere.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm not too worried. There's part of the business logic that's generic, and there's part of the business logic that is like specific to data about like what we care about. And that last part is the hard part.
Okay.
But so there's another thing in here though. So as a point, like you said, you want nothing to do with the current domains. Would it be a useful thing today to start automatically tagging everything that comes in by its top level domain, so like NOAA.gov, and by its subdomain, like its full domain, and then stop generating the sheets based on the Versionista named domain and start generating them based on that? Would that be helpful to you?
Yeah.
Okay, because that's an easy, super generic, like straight up thing that we can do. That's easy.
Yeah, that would be super useful.
Okay. We'll figure out who can start doing that ASAP, because that should really not take very long.
And then we can look at like the size and of each of those, and like maybe the over a couple of weeks looking at like how many changes seem to be typical in those different ones, and then start consolidating from there.
Yeah.
Okay, that sounds great. That'd be wonderful.
So that was, I think, super productive. But maybe we can try to run through some dev updates here quickly before we go to the next meeting. We burned through pretty much the whole meeting.
Sorry.
Oh, we're here to support analysts, so that's important. Okay, Dan.
So in 10 seconds or less, I caught up on notifications over the holiday. I'm doing the sysadmin hiring, and I have a new idea for how we should do monitoring and logging that I posted in the notes. I can make an issue. We can discuss it there.
Rob.
Handful of hot fixes and small patches and things. I didn't get to any of the big things I was hoping to get done over the holidays. The rest, most of what I've got here is basically a copy paste from the last meeting we had, because I didn't get to any of the major things. The one point worth noting is something that came up from the analyst, is there's an interesting situation where some parts of government websites just have a little banner that says like, hey, the website's still here, but it's not really being updated because nobody is paying for us to update the website. And some of them are actually just full on blocked. Like you get redirected to like, this part of this site is totally shut down and gone. And maybe it'll come back when we get funding again. And so doing some work with Brendan and seeing if we can get Walk to reasonably readily identify those pages so that we can say something meaningful about how much of what sites is just like gone because of the shutdown and how much is still available, just not updated. That's it for me.
And then I basically did nothing related directly to Scanner. I have been spending what time I have been spending on sysadmin hiring. And yeah, otherwise same as December. So that's me. Other discussion items.
I had a quick kind of question, because I see Rob's thing about authorization for a public UI. So this is semi-related. I was curious, like if I wanted to go to like a meetup group or something and just show people the staging, just to show people it, not they're using it. Do people have any issues with that? Like just to show them, me like showing them the diffing and how it looks, the UI itself on staging.
I think that's totally fine. Honestly, I think it's anybody who comes up to you after that and is like, how can I help? I think it's okay to set them up with an account too. Because the really valuable thing is that like somebody has to at least take some action that like shows a little bit of effort, and then they get an account, and that's cool. And because it's still account based, like if somebody abuses it, we can also just turn them off.
Yeah. Right now, it's just people looking at things. They're not annotating or doing anything anyways.
Yeah, and it's the staging server. So I'm totally cool with also just not just showing it, but being very liberal and giving out account access.
Okay.
For my part, at least.
Yeah, for staging. Okay. And then the last discussion item.
So who all is going to Toronto?
Oh, for Dan.
So that really is a question for Dan then.
Yeah.
Have you looked at there's a doc that's like a giant pile of random planning things, and there's a sort of like topics of discussion list in there about like things people want to address. Have you read that?
I assume it can't help but go better than last year. So it was contentious. That's all. I don't know. I think I'll have to look at that. Not a good use of people's time for me to do that real time. So I'll take a look at it.
I think that's it for this meeting, and that we're now on to the cross team meeting once people start showing up for that.
Okay. So until people show up to the cross team meeting, is there anything we want to cover?
I mean, to the Toronto question, Dan, just I think one of the big open questions that we were talking about the archiving was like the future of people's roles in Edgy and just what you imagine the future of Edgy is. It's like there's a really big thing between like winding down, or like there's a huge spectrum between like, you know, turning into a nonprofit, and then on the other side, people are just like, we should just wind down. Do you have any sense of how you feel on that spectrum?
What was the second bit? What, winding down into a nonprofit and?
Well, there's like going full force, try to get $1 million a year in funding.
Oh, I see.
Become a nonprofit, and then on the other side, it's like just winding down and cutting things off after the grant is done.
I see. Oh. And carrying on in a middle phase isn't an option? Do we need to be? Is it grow or collapse?
Well, from my perspective, my suggestion was like, I mean, as this org structure that might not exist, but maintaining our relationships and our connections to each other in some form. Yeah. Definitely, I want that to remain. But like with working groups and the steering committee, maybe that's not sustainable unless like people give up their jobs, like how Christian was talking about, and like, you know, do this 40 hours a week. And are there people that can do that? But yeah.
Yeah.
Because there's definitely a lot of institutional burnout, and people, you know, Don had to take time off, Justin took time off, and so people are feeling that burn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. From my part, I'd like to see it keep going, and I don't see my involvement ending anytime soon. I think there's, you know, we're kind of in some ways just getting to the fun part. So from my point of view, it would be a pity to see it wind down at this point.
Cool.
But I guess I would add that I'm one of those people who takes advantage of being able to drop in and help when I have time, and then vanish. And I recognize that people like Don and others in the SC that I don't even know that well have a lot to do with keeping it rolling. And so if it was important to grow in order to make that more sustainable for them, I would fully support that. Defer to what other people think is needed.
I briefly looked at the draft agenda that the two consultants made, and I can find that link and drop it in the chat or in the Slack channel. And one exercise in there that looks interesting is sort of thinking about the different political scenarios in the future of what happens if Trump is reelected, what happens if we have a major blue wave, and kind of does Edgy, is the future of Edgy, different in these different future scenarios? Do we continue to be, responsive to a political moment? Do we chart our own path, based on where we arose from, and in the path that we're on now? I think that could be a really interesting exercise to play with. And as a federal employee, I think I'm very curious of your perspective on that, in particular.
Yeah, I think, I say something quickly now. I think a lot of us have gotten drawn to this, our attention was brought to it by the political moment, but I think what we want to do changes very little based on what changes politically, because I see a long-term problem with the invisibility of this data and the way that it changes. And, we'll do it in a more or less frightening context, and we might be focused on different kinds of things, but there's always ways to push on the government to make it better, right? So.
Yeah, I mean, I do feel like maybe it's worth putting some more weight on the fact that, at least in web monitoring, the thing we keep saying, and especially the thing I hear repeatedly on the analyst side, is that we don't want it to be political in the sense that it's just a like reaction to Trump, but that this should be about like holding any administration to this set of values that we think are important with respect to data, and especially environmental data, but also that like it should be as much about praising and appreciating when it's done well, as opposed to holding account to the far more often case right now when it's not. And I think not continuing this past a theoretical end of a hyper conservative administration is sort of also not putting action to those words in some way. So I don't know. Like that's the thing I think about when I think about that, I guess.
I think EDGI is still formally not a political organization, right? Because of our relationship with Public Lab, if nothing else. So I agree with what Rob said.
Yeah, I really agree with that too. And one of the things that's been striking me the most lately is kind of like how shit websites are, like in a lot of ways, like, you know, with the amount of information that's conveyed, and like no citations. Like this isn't going to pass like, you know, high school citation guidelines, like, and that sort of thing. And so like we report on changes that occur, but then it's like, but there was shit information to begin with. And like, you know, if we're holding like what web, I mean, that's not, you know, I'm saying that as a blanket statement. Of course, there's like nuance and all that. But like if we're utilizing the Obama era as a gold standard, like I don't think that's good enough.
Yeah, that's actually, especially the thing about citations, a super interesting point that I hadn't thought a lot about. That in a climate where it feels less emergency breakage that we're sort of monitoring or reporting on, there's a lot of interesting things to be said about how the website could convey the things that we think are actually important about what the EPA does or NOAA does or whatever better, that we could publish on or write on or report on, which I hadn't even really stopped to think about, but this would be awesome.
Yeah. And connecting back to our relationships that EDGI at large has with federal employees, I think we've assumed all the way through this that the people on the ground are to some extent on our side, that they want the information they create to be available. And right now, I feel like our role is as trying to protect them or be a backup for them. But if we had a working relationship with them where we said, hey, our scraper has trouble with your site, and basically what you just said, Rob, here's how we think you could present it in a more machine readable or citable way or connect it up differently, I imagine that we would find some willing partners in that, and we'd have the space to do it.
Yeah, I think something that's interesting, you know, Rob, you mentioned you sort of classified this current administration as conservative. What's interesting is I think it's not even that it's uniquely anti-institutional. And I think that, I mean, I think we've all been saying things along the same side, and I agree with what I'm hearing. Like, there's that long-term just idea of like, you know, government is supposed to be providing the citizens with some public good, and the integrity of the data that it's sharing is critical to that. And like, that's a long-term, being sort of a watchdog or even a enabling organization outside of government, that's a long-term set of needs that we could work to meet. And I think there's important work to do in that sphere, even though right now what we're doing is, yeah, very much on the lowest level of should government function, should government exist, is the truth, is objective truth even a thing? I mean, is sort of like the basic things that are being called into question. And yeah, I think if we are in a future era that is hopefully better, where those questions, those things are obviously like, yes, we should have those things, and there is truth, and we should share that knowledge. Then yeah, that sort of answering the questions of how, like, is the way that this service, this public good being delivered, up to par.
Yeah, for sure. I've just typed in the chat, like, your phrasing is 1,000% better and exactly what I was trying to get at and worded poorly. I was in my head before I said conservative, I was like, this is not the right word, but I can't think of a better word right now. Yes, totally agree.
I think that what Kevin brings up about what are we going to do? What is Edgy going to do? Grow or die? Can it sustain itself? I mean, I'm making that dramatic, but like, I think that's an important thing to think about, and this just kind of came up in another meeting, where I expressed, and I'll kind of re-express here, like, what, in that light, I would like to make sure that what I'm doing, for Edgy's money, is enabling it to sustain what I think of as very important work. And I think that we have a lot of room to figure that out, and that I have a long way to go, in terms of feeling like I'm delivering to Edgy, based on what it's costing to have me on board. So I think, assuming that Edgy wants to continue to do the work that we all think is so important, thinking about how we structure the things that drive our costs, both money costs and volunteer time and energy costs, to deliver as much public good as possible for that, and to try to sustain it over the longest period of time.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, Jay, I think what I see, one of the difficulties in your position is that it's, not only supposed to be a very technical position, but you've had to take on a lot of coordination type tasks, and there's not that people power to do that, so that you can really focus on software development. And it's this common problem that we're seeing across all the different roles, I think, and Edgy in general. There's not, if you combine like all the steering committee members and things like that, that's not even a full-time person to do coordinating. Kelsey is having, like, she can't get in. She's getting error codes. She tried to call in and she tried to join the Slack, or try to join the Zoom, and for some reason she's not able to get in. But she was messaging. She wanted to start discussing about all the different the cleaning up that she's doing in our repos. So
I don't think I've had a chance to be on a call with her yet, too. So that would be nice whenever.
Oh no, but she's not able to make it right now. In the notes there is this repo audit that she's working on. So
seems like a lot of good cleanup PRs coming out of that. That's good.
Yeah, but do we want to look at those repos that she suggested we archive, just to make sure people kind of see them and feel like what needs to be saved, what doesn't?
Sure.
Yeah, sure. I feel bad because I've had a task on my sort of to-do list to, like, actually go through and do my part of that audit, and I haven't.
Yeah. So if I'll put it in the chat if you don't see it. That spreadsheet with all the different repos. I think the things that she was recommending that we archive are the ones near the bottom that have a red box, like there's not much activity in.
Right. So why don't we go through the red ones one at a time and just see what we know about it?
Sure.
I think the video call landing page we do use.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
And she took a note. She noted that. So that's the only one that she said we shouldn't archive.
Oh, right. There it is. Okay. I don't know what that is. Does anyone know about Fiscal?
I didn't even know it existed.
Okay.
And it is a very one-off thing that Nick was doing, and yeah, it was like he put in a diagram of like the monies from old grants, but
I see.
This obviously hasn't been updated in a really long time. So
I have never really gotten into the Trello. Do we still use the Trello?
no.
Okay.
So for what it's worth on the Fiscal one, from my very minimal understanding with it, I think I agree that we should archive it, and that what it's trying to do, which we keep wanting to do but not really following through on, is better done somewhere else, like maybe in the website repo or something else. Anyway, slightly more opinionated than don't know.
Yeah. Sorry. Wait, we should talk about Trello before we get to the next one. I have something about database, but
I did not know there was a Trello backups repo, so I also didn't know this one existed. But I
are we talking
agree
about
that
deleting or archiving?
Archiving.
Okay, good.
I agree that we're not doing anything with Trello really, so that this probably doesn't make sense to keep around, or I mean, like, to keep active.
The database was the GSOC with Brandon, and that can be archived. I don't know what URL proxy is. That's a 3 commit Brandon project. I suspect we can archive it.
Yeah.
Oh, given the date, probably the same as the S3 upload server. That would be in support of Archivers 1.0 app. Analysis.
Gotta love the completely generically named repos.
Yeah.
I'm surprised that there's not one named code.
I think a lot of these come from a time when the technical project of Edgy was Archiver Space.
Right.
So it made more sense. This would be like if all of Edgy Gov data archiving was just for web monitoring, then we wouldn't prefix the repos with like web monitoring, whatever. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
GoCalcDiff can probably be archived. That was the original diffing server before we had anything on our side.
Yeah, that can definitely be archived because we are not using it at all anymore.
The EOT nomination tool, I think we don't necessarily want to archive. I think we want to keep that for the next end of term. Is my proposal. We can always unarchive, but
how does that even work? I wasn't.
I think this, unless I'm confused, I think it's the Chrome extension. Let me look at it. But I think there's a Google Chrome extension primarily written by Matt. Yeah. That lets you tell the Internet Archive, I'm looking at a web page in my browser right now that I think you should archive as part of your end of presidential term archival sprint. And so Internet Archive sort of opens the floodgates to user submissions for the specific scope of presidential end of term. And at the early data rescue events, that was one activity, was visiting government web pages that I wasn't currently watching and use this Chrome extension to submit them, which is a little more convenient than whatever pathway IA had formally or officially set up. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I agree that we should keep it around.
Yeah, I would say, especially given that that Chrome extension is still on the Chrome Web Store, so unless that it gets deprecated and we want to pull it down from the web store.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like if something is distributed on some other channel, we should remove it from that channel if we're going to archive the repo for it.
Right.
Because archiving should be a signal that like we don't maintain it anymore, and if we don't maintain it anymore, we probably shouldn't be suggesting people use it because if there's security problems or other things, they're not going to get fixed.
Okay, guides was work from Dawn and the rest of us at the early data rescue events with Penn, and I think that can go unless Gretchen agrees. Okay. And all the rest of these can also go.
What's Python site? I didn't even realize we had this. I wonder how the Python sitemap thing compares to where Walk is now.
Yeah, I haven't thought about this in 2 years, so I have no idea what it does.
Not that has any bearing on like whether we should archive it or not. Just
yeah. I mean, in those cases, do you want to archive or do you want to kill our forks? I guess we have one commit. With a good commit?
With the forks, we should figure out whoever did the work that we needed to fork it for and find out whether that got merged back in to the main line. Because if it did, then we should just delete.
Yeah.
And if it didn't, then we should figure out whether that deserves some like way too late revisiting, or whether we also just delete. It doesn't seem to make sense to maintain a fork that's not doing anything.
Yeah, well, it looks like this fork specifically, just the difference is it added a Docker file.
Which fork is that?
The grab site.
Oh, grab site.
Like that's the change.
And it's all, of course, on master. Oh, there's a bunch of other branches. Well, I guess you can't tell whether they're.
Yeah, it's hard to tell.
Yeah.
I made the mistake of pushing pour a fork on master for the YouTube upload. I should ask somebody how to like revert that after this. Instead of like having a develop branch like option. I realized like later on, because I was like furiously trying to like hotfix something, and I was like, oh.
That's not a crazy thing to do on a very small project, but it's a little weird to push to master on a fork.
Yeah, I understand.
Even though that's totally what most people do on a fork. Yeah. They're like, I just need to fix this one thing, so I'm going to do it on master.
Yeah.
And then they can't fix anything else.
Yeah.
This is certainly the one and only bug I will ever find on this project.
It's also super obnoxious on the maintainer side to look at diffs that just show the branch. So it's like on master has this, master has this.
Yes.
I'll research how to revert that a bit or somehow, because it's for the YouTube upload, which we use all the time. So I think I should go back and like maintain that. Okay. So we went through all those. Nice. So Kelsey messaged me, and so she had two kind of topics that she wanted to discuss quickly. One was the stale policy that was she put in place onto the overview repo, and she was wondering if do we want to now consider putting that on other repos like web monitoring and stuff. The policy is she has a bot that will tag issues older than 6 months as stale, and if nobody responds, it will close the issue. Right,
yeah, and that's all configurable. So you put a configuration file in the repo root or in a particular folder, I forget, and it'll read that to figure out the policy. I was just going to add it to all the web monitoring repos, but if somebody else wants to do it, cool. I felt like that seemed like a straightforward yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I personally can find those a little bit annoying sometimes because they generate a lot of noise, but I'd be fine with that as long as the period was long. You said 6 months?
I was like, maybe the time period for web monitoring might need to be different.
Okay. With when projects grow, you do tend to get a lot of like long shot ideas, and I think GitHub Issues is a great place to put those ideas so they don't get lost, or when someone shows up and said, I have this idea, you can say, here's the discussion on that idea. And having to comment to kick them and to keep them alive every 6 months is slightly annoying. But
I believe in the policy file, you can tell it to ignore certain tags. Things that are like long shot, like dreamy ideas, those actually really should be tagged that way. So that's a good, it's actually a good tool to force us to do that.
Yeah, I'm totally convinced by your argument that we should just put a special tag on it. Great.
Cool.
Cool. And then, so somebody will implement the same kind of stale policy on the WebMoney repos. We can figure that out and the time. And then the last question she had was, she's going through and trying to create like a standard set of labels. And people just had any opinions on that issue. Oh gosh, I should find it somewhere. But maybe we look at that off like asynchronously, like or.
So off the cuff, I would say that we, or I guess, as the person who's done the most managing of the issues, I've sort of I gave up on separating first timer and help wanted and sort of consolidated those into one conceptual idea. So I've stopped tagging things first timer, and I've started only tagging things help wanted that would also qualify as first timer, because it turns out like it's hard to get started and everything anyway. And so if somebody's caught by the signal help wanted, they are also a first timer. So that's one bit of feedback, because we used to do those as two different labels, and I think we do those as two different labels in other repos. And my experience has been those don't make sense to have two different labels for it. We have a label in some of the repos, but not all of them, for tagging a topic as like a question or sort of a vague proposal that needs discussion. And I think that's a useful tag, and that we should have it across everything, but we don't. So that is one. And in some projects that I've been on, there are like a giant pile of labels that are priority based, so you can prioritize different things, and those are useful, and we don't do that. So that might be useful to have everywhere.
Yeah.
Those are my quick thoughts on labels if we're trying to consolidate and standard.
Yeah. In the overview, there are priority, like there's just a 1, 2, 3. So I don't know if that's enough granularity, but that's something we can pull across. And then, so you were saying first timer and help wanted are kind of the same thing. Do you have a preference over whether it's first timer or help wanted?
I stopped using first timer, or I stopped using first timer and started only using help wanted.
Okay, because Kelsey's proposal was to use good first issue, which is a GitHub default issue. I don't know if people have feelings on that.
I don't have strong feelings on it.
Yeah,
I think it's more important to have one than what that one is.
Yeah. I think that we're all in agreement on that. So, so somebody just say like, "This is the one."
Yeah. There was I'm frantically Googling. There was like a conversation about this, and about wordsmithing that so that it makes sense to people who are actually newcomers. And I'm trying to find if I have.
Yeah. I was just gonna say, because there's this like whole like first timers only movement, like with the website and different people advocate. So that's how I learned about it, and so that resonates with me personally more. But again, like I don't have whatever others like in the open source community find easiest to look for, I'd go with it.
Okay. Also worth noting or pointing out, there's a handful that are managed by other tools, specifically Waffle sets up needs review in progress, and I think there's one other one. So those, I think you might be able to configure them in Waffle, but if we remove them or change them, Waffle will probably just recreate them. So like, just to keep in mind if we're messing with those.
Okay. Cool. And those are the 3 things that Kelsey asked me to kind of go over. So, yeah.
Okay, well, guys, we've actually I've just hit a hard stop. So,
Okay. That's good. I should get back to my actual job. It's good hanging out.
I think we are good. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah.
Have a great day. See ya.